your supervisors, your managers, they're your allies, right? They're the ones that are on the shop floor. They're the ones that have the closest relationship with the rank and file employees, the potential bargaining unit members. They're the ones that need to be trained to understand what some of the potential signs of unionization are so that they can bring it to your attention, so you have an understanding that this is going on, even or potentially going on, even before a union representative brings those signed cards to the National Labor Relations Board.
Good morning, HR. I'm Mike Coffey, and this is the podcast where I talk to business leaders about bringing people together to create value for shareholders, customers, and the community. Please follow, rate, and review Good Morning HR on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, or at goodmorninghr.com. Following 2 years of pandemic-related workplace chaos and uncertainty, many unhappy employees are looking to unions to, they hope, give them more influence on the terms and conditions of their employment. This year, we've seen unionization efforts at large employers like Amazon, Apple, Starbucks, and JetBlue, as well as many lesser recognized employers. And this trend, encouraged by President Biden's very pro-union National Labor Relations Board, shows no sign of slowing down. Joining me today to discuss organizing efforts and employers' practical and legal responses to them is Jon Hyman. Jon is chair of the Employment and Labor Practice Group at Wickens Herzer Panza in Avon, Ohio, where he is also co-chair of the Craft Beer Practice Group. He is also the author of one of the few blogs I read every day, the award-winning Ohio Employer Law Blog. Welcome to Good Morning HR, Jon.
Thank you so much for inviting me and having me on.
So early in my HR career, a mentor explained to me that the companies that end up getting union organized probably deserved it. And I think her point was that companies that take care of their employees, are respectful to their employees, provide a positive working environment, don't have to fear unions, getting hold in their organization. If it was ever true, do you think that's still true today?
It's absolutely still true today, and maybe more true than ever, given kind of where we've seen the current wave of unionization going. It's interesting. I spoke, 9 months ago at an online craft brewery conference on the topic was pay equity, pay equality for brewery employees, and I was on a panel with some other people, and when the advertisement for the session went up on the sponsors Facebook page, all hell broke loose over this people who had found me online and said, you're having this union busting attorney, this anti-union lawyer, come on and talk about pay equity and pay equality, and he's clearly anti-employee, and he has no business offering any opinions whatsoever on what's good for employees. And I was like, whoa, let's take a step back. Like, you can be anti-union because you believe that unions are not the right vessel, the right tool to cure what ails employees in workplaces, but still be pro-employee. You can still believe that there is a right way to treat your employees from a culture standpoint, from a pay standpoint, from an equity and equality standpoint, and do all the things that you should be doing as a good employer, as a good corporate citizen, to treat your employees the right way, and still be anti-union. And those two things are not mutually exclusive, which is all by way of circling back to say that for those employers that don't get that message, that treat their employees poorly, that don't pay them a fair wage, that have a culture of abuse and mistreatment, that don't listen to their employees' concerns, that don't give their employees a voice, or at least any kind of voice in the direction or management of the business and the operations, I mean, they're going to get what they deserve. And those are the workplaces that are 100% percent plus right for unionization. And I think it's incumbent upon employers to now more than ever, given what we're seeing out in the marketplace, to kind of take a look inward and do a little bit of introspective review to say, what kind of employer are we? And if you can't check the boxes of being the kind of employer, I mean, I say be an employer of choice for employees, not an employer of opportunity for unions. If you're not an employer of choice for employees, you got some soul searching to do, especially in the current climate.
And it's funny that anybody would level that accusation at you, because if they look at your blog, you highlight bad employer practices. You call those employers out. You even have the bad employer of the year, or whatever you call it.
My worst employer award. Yeah, and people always say to me, you're a management side lawyer. Why do you have a worst employer award? And it's because I'm highlighting the kind of conduct that you don't want to do. Like, I've been doing this for 25 years. I know why employers get sued. I know why employers get organized. I know why employers or workplaces turn into revolving doors for employees. It's not what you want for your business. Right. No employer should want to get sued, right? But if you end up on my list of worst employers, you're doing something that's going to get you sued. And so it is more of, it's not that I'm being anti-employer or even pro-employee. These are cautionary tales of how not to treat your people that are going to keep you out of court. And look, I mean, if you want to pay me $150,000 to defend some awful thing you did, I'll happily take your money, but it's not good for your business.
Right. It's not good for, I mean, it's, it may well be out there on social media and in the news media. It's bad for your PR. It's bad for your employee, attracting the kind of people you want to the organization. It's just, I mean, it's the reason we have, in good organizations, good HR departments, right? To help, train and coach managers to treat people well and to build cultures.
Yeah, good HR departments that actually have a seat at the table in the C-suite that the rest of the C-suite listens to their concerns and listens to them and gives them a voice in how the employment functions in the business are managed.
So what do you think is driving this renewed focus by workers on unionization? I've heard more conversation this year than even I recall, at least during the Obama administration, which was pretty pro-union. But it seems really hot, especially the last 18 months.
Yeah, I think it's a combination of three things. And it's interesting you brought up the Obama administration. President Biden is by far, hands down, the most pro-union president we've ever had, period. I mean, he's got, deep blue collar roots from Scranton, Pennsylvania. He wears those roots. He doesn't hide those roots. He's proud of them. And he is unabashedly pro-union more than any other president we've ever had. But separate and apart from President Biden's pro-union more than leanings, his strong pro-union beliefs and the impact that's having on policy at the National Labor Relations Board. We can get into some of that, but I think there's two external factors that are at play here too, and they kind of play off each other. I think one is the pandemic, but more specifically, I think the safety concerns that COVID-19 highlighted in workplaces across America. Safety has long been at the top of the hit list of talking points for labor unions, and the COVID pandemic underscored with a bold tip Sharpie marker, underscored how employers were failing, or how some employers were failing their employees' health on the health and safety front. I think separate from that, or also playing into that, I think the current wave of unionization is largely generationally driven, more so than ever before. We're seeing, when you look at, workplaces like Starbucks and REI and Trader Joe's, these are younger, or Apple, younger workforces. I think Gen Z is driving a lot of this, and I think the activist lessons that Gen Z kind of cut their teeth on and learned through the Black Lives Matters protests, and we've seen it with the the post Roe v. Wade abortion protests and LGBTQ plus protests and the other kind of social justice issues that have energized and that Gen Z's been able to rally around. I think Gen Z has taken what they've learned in organizing around social justice issues and taken those lessons and turned them inward to the workplace to say, we've been able to make a difference externally on issues that matter to us, but we work 8, 10, 12, whatever hours a day. And so we need to use those same organizing tools to make a difference in our jobs as well.
They're mad as hell and
There
they're
you
not going to
go.
take it anymore. Yeah. Which is a reference that many of the Gen Z folks would never
but
get.
one of the what
it's
we
an
watched
old
that
movie.
in. I took a mass media law course in law school, and I've been out of school now for 25 years, but yeah, but we watched that. I had never seen that movie Network. I had never seen that before, but we watched it in our mass media law course, and it's a movie for people who haven't seen Network. I'm not sure what service it's streaming on, but you should find it and watch it because it's more relevant now, I think, than it was when it came out in the 70s.
And so I know you've represented a number of employers who've been, had various efforts at unionization inside their organizations. Are you seeing that the expectations of those Gen Z folks or the activists who are pushing for unionization? I guess the question is two-pronged. Do they seem to have valid gripes? Or is this what's often called, or are they just being snowflakes and not having, not wanting to get up to work and go to work every morning, and are they really catching ground with older members of their peers who are of other generations, Gen X, millennials?
To answer the second part first, I think they are. No union drive is going to succeed. You need it's a majority vote. And so you do need majority. It's a majority rule, and you're not going to get that without capturing at least some of the interest and attention from people outside your own demographic. So I think their message is, I think, catching on. What they really want at the end of the day, I think, is a seat at the table. They want to be heard, and I think that's what's largely driving this. And when we talked about the pandemic earlier, they want to be heard on safety issues. They want to be heard on equity issues and equality issues. They want to be heard on pay issues, but I don't. Some people might disagree, but I've never believed, and I still don't believe, that pay is the driving factor in union organizing. I think it has much more to do with having a voice and being heard and feeling that management is listening to you and taking your concerns seriously. And in workplaces where employees don't feel they have a voice or don't feel that management is listening to them or taking their concerns seriously, they're going outside the organization to find someone that will listen to them and maybe come in with a bigger stick that's going to get their concerns addressed. So
How has the Biden NLRB changed the tone from what we had with the Trump NLRB, and how is that affecting the success or the progress organizing efforts are having?
unions have always, I hate to speak in overgeneralizations, but unions have always had the advantage in this process. Unions always win more elections than they lose, and the election win rates are trending up, but not greatly, trending up from like the high 60s to the low to mid 70s. So, you're at like, traditionally unions will win, 65, give or take, percent of elections, and now they're winning, maybe 8 to 10 points higher. So the current environment plus the very, very, very friendly year they have at the NLRB has helped, but not to a significant degree. But the policy changes that are on the forefront, or are coming down the pike at the NLRB, are significant. So things like card check recognition, which is very much on both the NLRB's radar, and some legislation that's called the PRO Act that's been kind of bounced around Congress, but given the current climate on Capitol Hill, it has no chance of passing. But it doesn't mean the NLRB can't try to kind of ram it through administratively on its own. Um, we let's back up and talk process a little bit and kind of how a union gets in the door and gets started. Unions need signed authorization cards from employees, and they only need and currently, unless an employer voluntarily recognizes a union, and there are some employers that choose to do that, they're in the decided minority. Otherwise, it's secret ballot election, and a union only needs 30% of signed cards by potential bargaining unit members to get a secret ballot election. From a reality standpoint, because it is a majority, it's majority rules. Unions won't ask for that election unless they have well north of 50% plus a lot. I've seen suggestions the number needs to be as high as 70% of signed cards before unions leave and ask for an election. The NLRB very much wants to get rid of secret ballot elections and wants to require employers to recognize and bargain with labor unions just based on the cards themselves, which would eliminate uh, all of the campaigning that goes on once the labor union presents the cards to the NLRB and files a petition for that election, and will give the employer almost no say in the process. And it's a short window now anyway, so the employer's say is really limited to begin with. The NLRB wants to make other changes, like getting rid of what are called captive audience speeches. That is where during union organizing before the election, the employer gets all the employees in a room and tells them why the employer thinks they should vote for the employer and not for the union. And there's lots of rules around what can or can't be said, both in those meetings and just generally during organizing. But the NLRB wants to make those meetings illegal as a matter of course. The NLRB wants to prohibit employers from telling employees things like, if you vote for the union, we won't be able to deal with you anymore on issues or concerns you have, which is accurate, right? Once the union is certified, they become the exclusive representative for employees on issues related to their terms and conditions of employment. And I believe it's accurate for an employer to say, if you vote for the union, you can't come to us anymore to talk about issues or concerns. You're going to have to go through your union in a formal process. But the NLRB wants to prohibit employers from even having that conversation with employees during election campaigns. So
yeah, you as an employee basically become a commodity at that point.
I think what gets lost in this process is employees bring a union in because they're tired of dealing with the man, right? The corporation, their employer. What they're really doing is just swapping out one corporate behemoth for another. The Teamsters, the steel workers, the auto workers, pick your union. They're corporations too, right? They have CEOs who draw big salaries. And even a lot of what we're seeing now, the Starbucks labor union was employee formed, it was formed by, it's an independent union formed by employees. The Amazon workers union, same thing. Same thing at Apple, or at least some of the Apple stores that are being organized, but they still have the backing and are getting the resources, these big international unions behind them. And so I think employees need to realize that, yes, while the union has an obligation to represent you fairly and look out for your interest, there's still a corporation that you're bringing in to address those issues for you. So it's not nearly as grassroots as a lot of people might think.
And a union is like any other organization. Its leaders are going to act in their own interest.
Yeah, I just wrote a story about they're going to act in their own interest, but they're going to act poorly. I just wrote a story about a lawsuit the EEOC filed against a Teamsters local for pretty egregious sexual harassment committed by the local's business agent. They have the same problems that any business does, and I think it's naive for people to think that unions are this pure and chaste organization that flies around the country with its angel wings and its halo, doing good for employees. There's good and bad on both sides.
And I think the pro-union employees would say they may be bullies and they may be, as coercive as the employers, but at least there are bullies.
Yeah, there are, right.
Yeah.
I think you're exactly right.
So when should an employer, let's say, an employer has some group of employees who have decided they want to try to organize, and an employer hears that, okay, they're collecting cards. And when should an employer respond, start their anti-union process? Is it when you hear that, hey, there's cards here, assuming the employer doesn't have an ongoing thing, so, looking at, getting feedback from employees about their work conditions and doing all the things that we would want an employer to do?
Yeah, well, the answer is before employees even start signing cards, or before the organizer even starts talking to employees. You got to do, as you said, all of the proactive things to, be fair and consistent in how you treat your employees. Culture has, I think, to some degree become a 4-letter word to a lot of people, but it really is all about culture. And so that's before. But then once you get with, and this is where a little bit of training here goes a long way. Your supervisors, who the National Labor Relations Act says as a matter of statute cannot be in a labor union. If you're a statutory supervisor, you cannot be in a union. Your supervisors, your managers, they're your allies, right? They're the ones that are on the shop floor. They're the ones that have the closest relationship with the rank and file employees, the potential bargaining unit members. They're the ones that need to be trained to understand what some of the potential signs of unionization are, so that they can bring it to your attention, so you have an understanding that this is going on, even, or potentially going on, even before a union representative brings those signed cards to the National Labor Relations Board. So it's things like, are there people you don't recognize out in the parking lot handing out literature? Do you see, potential things that could look like union literature, in the break room or the lunchroom? Are there groups of employees that don't normally socialize with each other, sitting, having a smoke together or having lunch together? Weird combinations of employees. Are there social functions after work that you would normally be invited to as a supervisor that you're being excluded from, right? The employees don't want you there. Things that might be innocent, right? But they might be a sign that a union organizer was talking to your employees. So things for the supervisor to really, supervisors, managers, to understand they need to be looking out for these things, but then also know what they're looking for, and then what to do with that information, which is run it up the chain when they think that's going on.
So in your experience, how often does the card collection process go undetected by an employer? And so they're just completely flabbergasted when they're presented?
More often than you would think. Yeah, more often than you would think, because that's the union organizers are highly skilled at keeping this information as close to the vest as possible. I didn't mention social media, but that's where a lot of this the current organizing is happening as well. So on Facebook pages, through TikTok videos and Instagram reels. So keeping an eye on what's going on out on the social web as well. But it goes undetected more than it should, because businesses don't know what to look for, don't know they should be looking for it. And the unions they have a vested interest. They have the element of surprise. They don't want you talking to your employees any earlier than you have to about these issues. And so they want as short a time as possible between when the employer finds out that organizing is going on and when the election is held by the board. And everything the union can do to keep that time frame as short and compacted as possible, the better for the union, because it's They might have been talking to your employees for 6 months. You as the employer may only have a matter of weeks to get your message out. So it is more often than not, but it's definitely by design.
Are unions using salts still? Are they sending people into workplaces as employees for the sole purpose of trying to organize the workplace? Or is that something we saw in an industrial environment 30 years ago?
Nope, still happening. Yeah, still happening. Still very much part of the union playbook. Still very much part of the union playbook. Salts are employees who get hired on to a company for the sole purpose of conducting organizing activity within that company. As long as there is a bona fide position that they're applying for, and they actually do the work once they're hired, there's not much a company can do about it. Once they're hired, they're an employee. If you think they're a SALT, if they express a bona fide interest in the job, you can't. It would be discrimination in violation of the National Labor Relations Act to refuse them employment just because of their status or suspected status as a SALT. And as long as they're doing the job once they're hired, you really can't do a whole lot about it, at least not without violating the act. They have a lot of protections, but that is still very much going on, yes.
And let's take a quick break. Good Morning HR is brought to you by Imperative, premium background checks with fast and friendly service. If you're an HRCI or SHRM certified professional, this episode of Good Morning HR has been pre-approved for 3/4 of an hour of recertification credit. To obtain the recertification information, visit goodmorninghr.com and click on Research Credits. Then select episode 67 and enter the keyword union. That's UNION. And if you're looking for even more recertification credit, check out the webinars page at imperativeinfo.com. I have 10 hours of recorded webinars, each approved for an hour of recertification credit by both HRCI and SHRM. 3 are even approved for HRCI business credit, and 1 qualifies for ethics credit. You can access all of these webinars for free at imperativeinfo.com. And now back to my conversation with Jon Hyman. So when those frontline supervisors, let's say their radar, their spidey sense goes off, and there's something weird here. The mailroom employees are having lunch with the shop floor employees, and that's not something we've seen before. Or hey, I found this flyer in the bathroom. What should what should the employer do when they first get wind that there's a card collection activity going on?
Call your labor lawyer. That's, okay. It's kind of half tongue in cheek, or it's 50% tongue in cheek, 50% kind of marketing, and 50% like factual, right? I mean, sure. You got to call your labor lawyer. There are so many ways as an employer to screw this up. And if you screw it up, you could win an election, but have the NLRB order that the election be reheld because of an unfair labor practice you committed in what you communicated or what you did during the pre-election phase, or in the worst case scenario, because the NLRB requires that these elections be held in what it calls laboratory conditions. You think of like a medical or a scientific lab, pure, clean, sterile. The NLRB wants these union elections to be held in the same type of laboratory conditions: pure, clean, sterile, free from unfair labor practice charges. If the NLRB concludes that it can't rerun an election under laboratory conditions because of something that an employer did illegally or unlawfully during the pre-election campaign, the NLRB could just institute a bargaining order to say, we can't have a fair election here. So employer, you did X, Y, or Z. Therefore, we're just going to order that we're going to certify this union as the bargaining rep of this group of employees, and we're going to order you to bargain with these employees. And that's a union organizing death sentence for an employer, but it's possible and it happens. And we're going to see this current board, I think, we've already seen them exercising their injunction powers in cases, and we're going to see them, I think, start issuing more bargaining orders as well. So based on unfair labor practices it finds during organizing campaigns. So really, really important to get the messaging and the actions right, and you can't do that um, unless you're a trained labor relations professional. You really can't do that without having your labor council involved. And the other fact that comes into play here is that human resources is really they are the party that's on the front lines here with all of this. But we're seeing organizing at a level that we haven't seen in not just a generation but in generations. And HR professionals don't have most don't have any experience in this world dealing with labor unions. And so you are dealing with union organizers. This is their full-time job, is to go into businesses, talk to employees, and get them to vote for the union. uh, that's their full-time profession. As an HR professional, not only is it not your full-time profession, but you have zero experience. And so you got to get the lawyers involved as early as possible so you can be trained and really intimately understand what you can or can't say and do during these campaigns.
And I want to talk about those unfair labor practices. But first, on the union side, what can or can't a union organizer do while they're trying to gain support for the union?
I mean, they can. This is going to sound a little more tongue in cheek than it maybe is intended or is in practice, but they can. I think they can really do whatever they want. I mean, they can't lie, cheat, or steal, but they can stretch things pretty darn far. What they say to employees. They can give out gifts, for example. Not to the substance of it being an out and out bribe. Um, but they
Including
can,
marijuana, right?
including marijuana. We saw that at the Amazon distribution facility in Staten Island, including marijuana. It is, union organizers. I mean, they can take the employees out to bars. They can, they set up meals. They gave out free pot. They can really do. They can certainly say and do a lot more than the employers can.
So, what are some of the things, just the highlights? I mean, I totally agree. You don't want to do surgery on yourself, and you want to bring in a surgeon who really knows what they're doing to help with that. And same for an organizing drive. The But what are the highlights of what an employer can or can't do once they know that there's an organizing drive going on?
Yeah, in terms of what you can't do, the acronym is TIPS, TIPS. So you can't threaten, you can't interrogate, you can't promise, and you can't surveil. So you can't threaten employees about what will happen if the union wins the election. So you can't tell them we're going to close the plant. You can't tell them we're going to have to lay people off. You can't tell them we're going to cut pay or benefits. You certainly can't retaliate, right? You can't threaten um, with job loss, and you certainly can't retaliate against employees who support the union by demotion, suspension, cuts in pay, or termination of employment. You can't interrogate employees about their support of the union. You can't poll employees um, or ask who has received an authorization card or who signed an authorization card. You can't make promises to employees. Um, and this is the one that I think trips up employers the most because it's the most nuanced. You can't, in terms of making promises, so you can't make explicit promises like, um, we're going to give you more pay. We're going to give you more. We're going to give you greater benefits. We're going to, if you vote no, we'll promote you or we'll, do X, Y, or Z for you. The other thing that falls under the category of promises is adjustment of grievances. So during organizing, you can't ask employees to, like, what are your problems? How can we help you? What are your concerns or the things we can do for you to make your workplace better? Because the implied in those questions is we're going to fix this for you before you even vote for the union. So if you vote union no, we're going to make your workplace better for you. And then you can't surveil or spy on employees. You can't watch who goes into union meetings. You can't attend union meetings and take notes or make recordings. You can't eavesdrop on employee conversations. You can't hack into email and things, and things like that. So threaten, interrogate, promise, surveil, the four big no-nos during union organizing.
One of the few actual decisions that have come out of the NLRB, it's newly constituted under the Biden administration, has been the Tesla decision about dress codes and how that affects, what an employer can or can't dictate about, what insignia an employee can wear. Will you talk a little bit more about that and how Tesla, according to the NLRB, got that wrong?
Yeah. So the Tesla employees, Tesla, one of their production facilities in California, was organizing. They pre-organization and throughout the organizing drive, Tesla had a very specific dress code in that particular. I don't know if it was company wide or just in that particular production facility, but they had to wear black cotton shirts with the Tesla logo and then black cotton pants with no buttons, rivets, or exposed zippers. With the no buttons, rivets, or zippers was so that they didn't scratch the cars that were coming down the production line. And then Tesla gave all this stuff to the employees to wear. United Auto Workers starts organizing the employees at this production facility and gave out to the employees black T-shirts to wear that had the logo "Driving a Fair Future at Tesla" along with the UAW's logo. Tesla banned the shirts as for violating their dress code that called for just a plain black cotton T-shirt with the Tesla logo on it. They said that's our dress code, and you can't wear these shirts that say "Driving a Fair Future" at Tesla. The NLRB said that prohibiting the black shirts with the UAW's logo and slogan on it was an unfair labor practice, violated the employees' rights to engage in what's called protected concerted activity, their right to support the union while at work. And what the NLRB said was that you are interfering with employees' rights. They have a right to display a union insignia outside of work and inside of work on their clothing, and you, employer, violate or interfere with their right to wear their union insignia unless you can demonstrate or establish some special circumstances that outweigh the employee's right to wear that insignia or logo at work. And so the board said things like, a risk to employee safety or the potential to damage machinery or maybe making dissension or fights among employees worse, or if necessary to maintain decorum or discipline within the workplace. Those would be special circumstances that might justify a prohibition on union insignias in the workplace. But absent those special circumstances, employer, the NLRB says, you cannot prohibit employees from wearing union insignia while working.
And you mentioned the captive audience presentations, and the NLRB doesn't like them and may do, has rumbled that they may do something about that, I guess. But right now that's legal, right? We can drag all our employees into a conference room and tell them why they don't want a union. We can't promise them, we can't tell them you're going to lose your job or anything like that, but this will interject somebody between you and the employer, and we don't think that's in your best interest.
Yeah, you can do it. I question in the current, I have questioned for the past 12 months or so whether the old anti-organizing playbook that employers use is still a valid playbook during the current wave of unionization. I question whether the anti-union tactics that worked 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 50 years ago still work today. Because what you see now is, employees get dragged into captive audience speeches, get held there for 15 minutes, 30 minutes, 60 minutes, and listen to a CEO, a COO, a general manager, whoever, give their spiel about why employees shouldn't vote for the union, and all valid reasons, and hopefully, written by someone like me. They're giving legal content to the employees, but then you have the employees, recording it and putting it up on TikTok, or you have the local union's Twitter account is, live tweeting the captive audience speech, or you have pro-union blogs or pro-union podcasts, of which there are several, reporting on what's going on. And I think sometimes, and I think particularly under the current wave of unionization, probably more often than not, the actions that employers are taking are kind of like proof of concept for the unions. The union says this is why you need a union, because you don't have a voice with management. They're making decisions for you. They don't take you seriously. They don't respect you. And then metaphorically, the employees are metaphorically, locked in a room for an hour, lectured, by their stepdad or their big brother or whoever, and told all the reasons why they shouldn't vote for the union and why the union's bad for them. And the union's like, see, look, this is exactly what we're talking about. So I think by and large, a lot of the old, and I call them old school, anti-union tactics are really proof of concept for the labor unions, and which is why I believe that employers should be adopting a different type of approach. It's a much more employee-focused approach, and it really is an approach that has to start, as I said earlier, before the union even comes in. It's really a focus on culture and why are we and why should we be an employer of choice for our employees. And so it's that kind of introspection that's going to work the best. And in this particular climate, and while employers are winning elections, sometimes I think you are so far behind the 8 ball when a union comes in that I'm not saying you fold up the tent and just recognize them, because you should fight the fight. But you are as an employer definitely fighting an uphill battle, particularly in front of this board.
And I think you said, although they only need 30% of cards for 30% of the workforce
right.
they're organizing.
Yeah, to hold the election, right?
Yeah, but they're really, even now, they're getting 50% before
70%. Yeah, 50%, well north of 50%, because they don't. The unions don't want to put their resources behind elections they can't win, and if they can't even get 50% of the cards signed, they have no hope of getting 50% of the employees to vote for the union. So they want to know they have a good chance to win before they even submit the cards.
And I'm sure they're not supposed to, but they can, or they do. Generally, they do maybe not threaten with violence, but threaten with ostracism in the workplace and pressure on individuals to sign those cards or to participate, and they want to see them sign them in person, things like that. And so they put pressure on those employees.
Tremendous amount of pressure. You're letting your coworkers down. I mean, they'll show up at employees' homes. They will call them on the telephone. Their inboxes will get bombarded. They'll get the social media messages. They're hearing it from the organizers. They're hearing it from their coworkers. It is a tremendous amount of both peer pressure and external pressure to sign those cards. And sometimes, what employees aren't given the whole story by the union as to what those cards mean too, right? It is, employees may not understand that by signing the cards, they are signing something that is going to give the union the right to hold the secret ballot election. They're told things like, you sign this. People don't always read what they sign. I'm a lawyer, and I don't always read what I sign, right? So, it's you support you think unions have the right to exist, just sign here, or whatever. But there are the messaging around authorization cards isn't always accurate from unions. And when you get the inaccurate messaging with the pressure that employees get to sign those cards, it makes it very difficult for employees to say no.
And that pressure is not just in the workplace, though. They can show up at an employee's home and do other things that, if the employer did it, it would certainly seem coercive.
It would be coercive, right? Right. But now you have some guy, some union guy you've never met, who you don't even know how he got your address, shows up at your door at 9:00 at night with a clipboard and says, "Sign here." And you're like, "Holy God, this guy knows where I live." Yeah, you'll sign to get rid of him.
Yeah, that's a nice car you've got in the parking lot. I'd hate to see something happen to it.
Yes, yeah, it was. Geez, new tires are expensive.
Yeah. We're almost out of time, but what do you think is going to happen with Browning-Ferris if it hadn't already happened already? I mean, this idea that I've got, so many employers are relying, especially for labor, on contractors and agencies to provide, to supply, labor. If I'm an employer in that environment, how much more risk am I, or at less? Is it the same risk as if these were all my regular employees?
Yeah. So Browning-Ferris is the NLRB's decision from several years ago that liberalized the board's joint employer standard. If you're a joint employer with another employer, then you are jointly and severally liable for the legal wrongdoings of the other employer. The Trump board correctly overturned Browning-Ferris, and now the current board has said we're going to go back to a slightly modified version of that, but we're essentially... Traditionally, the NLRB required that an organization exercise direct control over the terms and conditions of someone's employment in order to be deemed a joint employer. Now, under these proposed regulations that the NLRB has put forth a couple of weeks ago, if those regulations become final, which I expect they will, as long as employers kind of indirectly exercise control or reserve control over the terms and conditions of employment, they're going to be a joint employer. And it's going to greatly expand the scope of liability for businesses. Things like potentially franchisors becoming liable for, not just liable for the legal wrongs of their independent franchisees, but also, because we're talking about the National Labor Relations Act here, there will also be a joint bargaining obligation. And I like to use kind of McDonald's as the stalwart example here because they're the biggest example of a franchisor that we have. But if I'm McDonald's and I am a joint employer with my independent franchisees, because of some of the control that I exert in my franchise agreement over the items on the menu and how things are cooked and the uniforms that employees wear, if I'm McDonald's and I'm going to be jointly and severally liable for the legal wrongs of my franchisee that I had nothing to do with and no control over, and on top of that, I now have to sit down at the bargaining table and bargain over the terms and conditions of employment with my franchisees employees, I'm like, to hell with it. I just might as well, I might as well own these stores myself and at least control the risk. So real risk for the franchise model, I think, in the US in general, but it's a great expansion of what liability means under the National Labor Relations Act. And we're going to see it as well under Fair Labor Standards Act and Family Medical Leave Act and Title VII and every other law that they are the other agencies after Browning-Ferris. They were the tail that wagged the NLRB's dog, and we're going to see it here too.
Well, that's all the time we have today. There's a lot more to talk about. I had hoped we'd get to Weingarten and what that means for employers under this NLRB, but maybe we'll have you back, I hope, John.
Sounds good.
And thank you for listening. You can find previous episodes, show notes, and contact info for our guest at goodmorninghr.com or on Facebook, Instagram, or YouTube. And don't forget to follow us wherever you get your podcast. Rob Upchurch is our technical producer, and I'm Mike Coffey. As always, don't hesitate to reach out if I can be of service to you personally or professionally. I'll see you next week, and until then, be well, do good, and keep your chin up.